I just want to say welcome to everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and just get started with some brief introduction. So as I said, my name is Saba Khan, and I'm a member of the MBA admissions staff. And we are extremely fortunate today to be joined by Professor Huggy Rao, who teaches organizational behavior here at Stanford. He's also the author of Scaling Excellence, a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And we're also extremely fortunate to have Kaye Foster joining us. And hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at our so-called homework that we sent you ahead of time. And you've had a chance to take a look at this wonderful case about Kaye's experience being exceptional, not an exception. And from here, I'm going to let Huggy take it away. And throughout the course of our discussion, you can feel free to submit questions via the Q&A box.
Fabulous. Thank you so very much, Saba, for that very gracious introduction. Good evening, everybody. Greetings from Stanford. I'm Huggy Rao. I'm a professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. And we're all very grateful that you've taken the time to be with us today. It's a privilege to be of help to you, so thank you. Today, we have an extraordinary guest, and that is my wise, smart, witty, I could go on and on just on W's alone, Kaye Foster. How do I describe Kaye? Kaye is a person who really, I think, has done just the most marvelous job I know of actually activating and creating a franchise around her best self. For those of you who are joining us today, on Monday, we actually had another session. And in that session, one of the things I was suggesting to all of you was, as you think of business schools, you may be prone to, or you may be seduced by the act of product comparison, where you compare business schools as products and create a giant matrix. And it sounds like a wonderful thing to do. However, I've often wondered as to whether that was a decoy problem, a problem designed to distract you from the real problem. Because the real challenge is not choosing amongst products. When we choose schools, when we choose jobs, we don't choose products. We actually choose amongst different versions of our life. We choose one version of our life as opposed to another. And one of the things I had suggested on Monday was that in a pandemic, it's actually hard for us to choose one version of life because we're in a room called fear. If you're afraid, how can you actually choose one self amongst many selves? It's very difficult because we have tunnel vision, we are risk averse and so on. And we need to be in a room called hope. Because when we have hope, as some wise philosopher put it, hope is a rope. So we can actually clutch that rope and it can take us places and it can lead to aspiration. And what's the passageway from the room called fear to the room called hope? What I had suggested was that all of you get in touch with your best self. What is your best self? It's the self that kind of, usually you can get in touch with your best self by simply asking yourself, hey, if there were 3 adjectives, 3 verbs, 3 adverbs that I can use to describe myself, what are they? That'll actually help you get in touch with your best self. You can look back in your life. You may be at home, you may be at work. There was a time at work. There was a time when you felt you were at your zenith, your peak. You felt exhilarated, accomplished, stretched. Maybe that's your best self. Or maybe if you're in a project team and if Kaye is the project team leader, she asks you, hey, choose a job title that showcases your best self. That's another way in which you can access your best self. What do best selves do? They actually help us focus on what we want to do. And getting in touch with the best self is actually an art. And that's the reason we actually offer you the case study with Kaye's generous wisdom and cooperation about the trajectory of her own life. Now to a description of Kaye, because your job is to ask questions, I will curate them, and Kaye is going to answer them. See, I leave the difficult task for her. And the reason is, Kaye is a person who's extraordinarily accomplished. But the defining feature of Kaye is how lightly she carries those accomplishments on her shoulders. As she is fond of saying, her career can be seen as an arc from the toilet to the tower. And if you read the case study, you will see how she began when she was a young teenager, 19 or so, from Barbados, coming to New York, being a cleaning lady, and then going to Baruch, and then attending Columbia Business School. You all know of the episode of her very first day at Columbia Business School, where she was asked by somebody, do you go to school? And her instant realization that while she may demographically be an exception, she really had to come to terms with the fact that she was exceptional. And then others would, of course, understand that very easily. Just think of that act of insight, that act of recognition, the flash of insight, remarkable. And if you look at her career from her beginnings in Columbia, she reached the executive suite of J&J. After J&J, she was part of a team that actually was involved in the successful IPO of Onyx, a big biopharmaceutical company. And today she's on the board of more biotech companies than I can count. She's, the chairperson of the Glide Foundation in San Francisco, on the board of the Stanford Hospital, an advisor to Carlyle, an advisor to BCG. And I can assure you, I've only scraped the tip of the iceberg. She's a trustee at Spelman. She's a person who truly, truly gives voice to the voiceless. And in all of my interactions, what I've seen Kaye do is she makes others, and indeed the ideas given by others, bigger and better. And she does that with rare humility, extraordinary wisdom. And amongst all the people in the C-suite I've seen, there's only one person I know who says, I'm going to master one word for the next 2 months, a word called complexity. And she's talking to, biophysicists and physicists and management characters like myself and God knows what. Remarkable person. Join me in extending a warm welcome to Kaye Foster, please. Kaye, I'm going to do an Indian namaste and say thank you.
Thank you, my friend. It's wonderful to be here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely. Good. Well, thank you, Huggy. I really, first of all, appreciate the space that you have created for me to share my story, to answer questions. The reason I like doing these kinds of, experiences is because I am a lifelong learner, and there is never a time that I don't walk away from an experience that I don't learn. So interestingly enough, when you did the introduction and asked the attendees to think about 3 words that describe themselves, of course, I could not help but do the same thing. So my 3 words are compassionate, curious, and charitable.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Each one reinforces another, and they truly define who you are. When I sort of see that, absolutely curious, compassionate, and charitable. And there you have Kaye Foster with us this evening. What I'd love for the audience to do is use the Q&A option can we pull up the Q&A option, please? So use the Q&A option to ask questions of Kaye. I'd like to curate them so that as you ask questions, I might bundle a couple of them and get them going.
Huggy, if you're having trouble with the Q&A box, there is one question that's come in already. Can you see
Brilliant. Wait 1 second. Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you tee it up, please?
Great. So we have a question coming in from Jimmy, who's asking, and I'm just going to read it in the way that it's written.
Oh, yeah, I can pull that up. Can I jet ski behind you, Saba?
Please, yeah.
Okay, what a beautiful question, Charlie. Charlie says, thank you for sharing the intimate story about your interaction with the lady with the Chanel bag. Looking back on your experience, what would you say to the other woman? to yourself just starting at Columbia? Great question, Charlie.
So what would I say to myself at that time, or to the Chanel bag lady?
Both.
Okay. So obviously with the benefit of hindsight, right? Because as I mentioned at that point in time, it really shook me to my core. And now looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I would have done with her what I do now, because no surprise to you, there are many places where I am still the only female, the only person of color, and sometimes the only female of color. And when I am at times met with a question about whether or not I am in quote unquote the right place, I generally in those circumstances engage truly from a place of curiosity, because I am intellectually curious about why an individual that has encountered me has a particular mindset, perspective, you may call it bias, that's causing him or her to react or respond to me in a questioning way. And the principle that allows me to engage with them, not from a place of anger or even disappointment, is unconditional positive regard. And it's how I try to walk through life, which is to hold out an intention to engage with that person unconditionally and holding them with positive regard, even in the face sometimes of overt racism or overt sexism. And therefore, when I engage, for example, to be very specific, I would say to the person, and I've done this before, what is it about this encounter with me that causes that question to come up for you? What, am I in the right place? Is it because you have an assumption about where my place is or where my place should be? And I am here because I've earned the right to be here. So if you are open to engaging with me, I'm open to having a conversation with you about what is it about this encounter in this place, the juxtaposition of those two things that's causing a query in you. And again, I do it from a place of unconditional positive regard, because I have found that holding that place in life, as I engage with people, it enables me to engage them in a fundamentally different way. And to myself, I would have urged patience, because at the moment that happened, as I said, I was shocked. I didn't know what to do about it. I responded from a place of naivete, because I didn't understand what was happening. And the little voice in my head, if I were looking back and giving that young woman advice, I would have said, as my mother says, patience, my dear, patience. You're on mute, Huggy.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. For that wonderfully detailed, textured, and nuanced response. Daniela has a question. Oftentimes, being the only person in the room that looks like us, or being classified as non-traditional, what would you tell your younger self to move through the process of believing that you're not an exception, but exceptional?
Yeah, you know, Huggy, it starts with how you started this, right? So much of this starts with your own sense of yourself and, an understanding of what it is that you bring of value. And so often we don't do the work to understand that. Or what I find when you're younger and you're growing, you're thinking about the achievement or the accumulation of things that you believe will create status for you, because you are still in pursuit of status. Particularly if I think about my younger self, when I, throughout most of my career, I was as I said, the only person of color, the only woman. And I've told you and Bob Sutton stories of being in Vietnam at a point in time where I was a curiosity for people. And this was back in the early 90s when I was in Vietnam. So I've grown not just comfortable, but I've grown confident in my difference. And so often we encourage people to get comfortable in their difference. I'm urging people to get confident in their difference. And the difference for me is real value. I was just before this call, I was coaching a CEO of an extraordinary company. And he said to me, he's only 32 years of age. He's young. It's a company in the biotech space. He's not a scientist, and his entire leadership team and most of his company are composed of people who are deep experts in the sciences, deep experts in technology. And he said, you know, it's one of the things that he's struggling with because he's in his head. And that was the advice I gave him. I said, you know, the single most important thing that you have to become is confident in your difference. And the way that you need to manifest that is asking the right questions. You, as the CEO, you don't have to have the right answers. You have to have the right questions. Because if you have the right team around you, that team will have the answers, right? You have to ask the right questions to spark the insight and to spark for them the inquiry that gets to quote unquote the right answer. So I would say that's how I would answer that question.
Brilliant. There are lots of questions coming. Richly generative case study. I'm going to bundle a bunch of these things. Mikhail Shin says, what gave you the power to overcome disbelief, stereotyping, and social deprivation? The way maybe I'd like to modify it. And Anna Laura, right after him, actually asks, sometimes people think I'm just a diversity number. What advice do you have for us that feel the imposter syndrome to actually overcome it? And here, Kaye, you mentioned two words: don't be comfortable, be confident. So can you share with the others on the call as to how self-discovery leads to self-affirmation, or is it the other way around?
No, I do believe self-discovery, and I don't think it's linear, right? I think that we as human beings are dynamic individuals. And I think so often, and you Huggy, you hear me say all the time, aspire for linear, but plan for discontinuous and disruptive. That is, for me, that's a model for life. That's not just about projects or work. That's a model for life. And therefore, getting confident, getting comfortable, is a process. And my mother would always talk about perfection is the enemy of progress. And she said, so often we focus on perfection and we lose track of the progress over time. So for me, what that looks like is I am genuinely, first of all, I approach life as a blessing. I say this all the time, every morning that I wake, and I'm 6 feet above ground as opposed to 6 feet below ground, it's a good day. So everything else is upside from there. So it starts, I think, with this affirmation of yourself and your presence, that you deserve to be a presence on the planet, right? And the imposter syndrome is alive and well. I go through that at times. As you could imagine, there are times when I can pick a board meeting. When I am at a board meeting and I am with, as a matter of fact, a board that I recently joined, the company's in stealth mode. On the board is one of the former commissioners of the FDA, a Nobel laureate, people who were former CEOs of incredibly successful companies, right? And I remember when I, quote unquote, we Zoomed, but walked into the first meeting, it was kind of like the reality of all of these people hit me. And I've got to go back and say to myself, I was chosen because I belong here, because there's something of value that I have to bring. And it's what I'm going to urge our audience to be really clear about what is the value that you bring. And don't numerate your value by your degrees, by your achievements. Numerate your value by who you are, right? And that's where the self-affirmation comes from. And the exercises that you give them are brilliant. What's 3 words that really speak to the essence of you, right? And how do you take those words and then have actions that actually reflect those words, what I call the intention experience gap? How do you make sure that the intention for your life is reflected in the experiences that you live and the experience that others have of you?
Beautiful.
Right?
That's beautifully put. Kay, here's a very mischievous and very pointed question from Alexandra. Alexandra asks you, is your approach different when you encounter racism and sexism from another woman of color?
Thank you, Alexandra. That's a brilliant question. So I'm going to tell you my journey, because as I said, I came from the Caribbean. I'm of Barbadian descent, was raised in the British system because we were colonized by the British. So I was raised with Oxford and Cambridge certificates. So in the British system, came to the US, and often, particularly in Colombia, and as I started my early career, people would say to me, especially when I am, typically the only woman or the only person of color, people would look and they would say to me, what is your name? And I would speak my name, and they would say, and then they would hear me and they would say, oh, where are you from? And, I'm very proud. I'm from Barbados. And then the response would be, oh, that explains it. And in my early naivete, I had no idea what that meant. But it's by doing my own work and doing a lot of work to understand the roots of structural and systemic racism and how it manifests in this country, I came to understand that by continuing to separate myself out, and when people would say, oh, you are different, I would actually be so thrilled that I was recognized as different. What I understood that I actually was doing a disservice to the collective Black experience that I should have been a part of, and I was a part of. So it's only when I came to realize that what was happening in that instant was an individual had a particular, let's call it a phenotype or stereotype of a Black person. I did not fit that phenotype or stereotype. And because they were so wedded to that bias or that stereotype, they had to make me an exception and put me in a box. And for a long time, until I understood what was happening, I would set myself apart. And therefore, I actually started to internalize a lot of the negative stereotypes that existed in this country about Black people. And I needed to go on my own journey to claim my identity as a Black person in this country with all of the dimensions of what that meant. And therefore, what you're probably talking about is colorism, because I also encountered colorism as well, or the infamous, and some of the folks on the phone will understand this on the Zoom. I was joining a Jack and Jill and was subject to the brown paper bag test, and I will leave it at that. And I guess I was close enough to the color of the brown paper bag because I was admitted. Again, naively, not even understanding the underlying structural and systemic racism within our own community. And that's why this journey of life is so important, and who you are and how your experience connects or is reflected in your intention. Ultimately, my intention was to show up fully claiming my identity as a Black person in this country with all of the challenges and the benefits. And that was a journey. There's no question about it. That was a journey.
So there are a number of questions. Your mom's a big hit, Kay.
Yeah.
So one lovely question about your mom is, your mom said the people you step on the way up are the people you meet on the way back down.
Yes.
And so the question that's being asked is, what do you do to support people, small little actions that you do to actually go out of your way to support other people?
Yeah. So a couple of things. At this particular point in my life, I do believe that I am so enormously blessed that I used to say in one of my iterations, I would say, when I leave the earth, I want to be all used up. I want to take everything that I have, everything that I've given, and I want to just use every single thing in service of others. I have gotten much more specific now at this point in time. I am really focused on women of color, women and men of color, particularly Black men and women. And what that looks like is everything from taking a call, because there are times when people are referred to me, they send me a note through LinkedIn and say, I saw you doing something. I know you're really busy. I'm a first-year student, or, I just moved to this country. So those are simple things. I mean, the most precious resource I have, all of us have, is our time. So if I take time to have a 30 or 40-minute conversation with some person, that's an investment in them. And Huggy, you and Bob have been gracious enough to send a number of students that I've had the absolute pleasure of mentoring, from some of them from Africa, some of them from the US. So that's one. I vote with my time. The second is I sit on the board of Spelman College. And by sitting on the board of Spelman College, I actually get, throughout the course of my time on the board, to really create greater opportunities, and not just opportunities, but insight. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, or maybe it was, I can't remember if it was her or Marian Wright Edelman, maybe it was Marian Wright Edelman, who said, you have to see it to be it. So at this stage in my life, for men and women of color, particularly, I want to see it. I want them to see me so that they can have a vision of what is possible for them. That's the second. And then the third, I actually use my network to create connection. And that's part of the asset that I have now. Is I'm blessed to have an extraordinary network. And that's what I do. I use that network in service of others. Everything from helping people find connections around funding, advice, business plans, even things as I was at an appointment, and there was a young woman who had just come back from maternity leave. And in the midst of COVID and trying to deal with everything. And I asked her, I knew she had just had a baby, second baby. I said, how's the baby? How are you doing? She burst into tears. And it didn't take, so I'm at the doctor's appointment, I'm at the doctor's office for an appointment, and I end up taking care of the doctor, which I think is pretty funny. But my only point is, there are always opportunities for kindness. And then simple things like, I keep dollars. I know you will think this is very weird, but I learned this from my mother. So in my pockets, I keep like single dollars or coins, because it's inevitable you're going to meet some person who is going to be in need. And instead of not seeing them or walking past them, easy enough to put your hand in your pocket and give some person something that they can go buy a cup of coffee or something with. I don't know how else but to be who I am. And that is who I am.
So there are a number of people who, of course, are saying in the Q&A column how inspired they are by you. Giselle, for example, says she often feels like the only woman of color in a room, as does Nikki, for instance. And then Soa Imosili asks you, What about you? Have you sought mentors in your life? How have the mentors in your and sponsors in your life supported you? And
Yeah.
then Rashmi has a follow-up question to that, and where Rashmi says, what is the difference according to you between mentorship, sponsorship, and advocacy? When
That's
is
my
one more
favorite
taken
question.
care
That is my absolute favorite question. So, and I do make the distinction across all three. So to answer the first question, I have had and continue to have mentors throughout my life. And the best way to describe them is a portfolio of mentors, right? There are people in my life who care deeply about me, my career, my progress, who I am. So early in career, interestingly enough, most of my mentors, sponsors, and advocates were white males. And that was just a function of the time in which my career was unfolding, that the leadership ranks, that was what was in the leadership ranks. Later in my career, I have had more women who have mentored me, who have sponsored, who've been advocates for me. But even to this day, I continue to have mentors, sponsors, and advocates. And it's a reciprocal relationship. And I do believe in the bounty of the universe. So some people call it karma, some people call it kismet. For me, it's the bounty of the universe. To answer the second question, for me, mentorship is, that's more informal. That is some person who you can ask questions. That is some person who, it does not have to be a relationship of hierarchy. It can be a peer mentor. The person doesn't even have to be in your organization or even in the same sector of work that you're in, but it's some person that you can ask just about any question. You can ask that person, I'm struggling with this particular issue. Can I just call you and chat about it? So for me, mentoring is more informal. That person as a mentor doesn't necessarily have the political capital to be able to use on your behalf, right? Because your mentor could be a subordinate. And that's the other thing I say to people. We sometimes get very hierarchical about these things. And I find that I am constantly learning from people who are earlier in career than I am. So that's mentor. Sponsor is some person who is willing to look out for you, who is willing to think about you even when you're not in the room. And it could be everything from a work assignment. It could be, and it's not just that the person is asking you for advice or you're asking for advice. There's a bit more formality to it. That's some person who's helping you think about your career, helping you think about your life, and they're willing to actively engage and sponsor you. Advocacy is some person who is willing to use his or her political capital on your behalf with no expectation of a return. So for me, advocacy, there's a selflessness about advocacy, and I'm willing to take the risk because at times it's risky. And I've been in this situation where people have done this for me. So I used to work at Pfizer, and was a couple of years out of graduate school. And I worked in the manufacturing plant. That was my first job. I worked in the manufacturing plant in a lean production system transformation in a very old line manufacturing plant. And then I was moved to the corporate headquarters, and there was the head of HR at the time. I got to know him, and he said to me, well, what would you like to do? How do you want your career to unfold? And I said to him, I really do think it's important that I get global experience, but I'm not sure, given that I was just planning to start a family, I'm not sure that I can take a post overseas. About a week later, he had created an opportunity for me to join a team and be the head of HR for a region called JALA, Japan, Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. And it did not require me, as long as I was willing to do this, it did not require me to move to the region, because think about it, where would I have moved? Japan? We're in Asia, Latin America. It wasn't practical. And that was what was so genius about what he did. But remember now, this is only my second assignment. This is a part of the business that the aspiration is $8 billion in revenue. And I am this relatively early in career HR leader. And he advocated for me, and not just advocated for me, he then made sure that I had the right kind of support structure or support system to make me successful. So that's the distinction I make between those three.
That's very helpful. Missy mischievously notes that these are great takeaways on World Kindness Day, by the way. I did not know that. Thank you, Missy.
Thank you, Missy.
For that little shout out. So Norquat asks an interesting question. On whose shoulders does the burden land for being exceptional? Is it you who internalize it? Or should those whom you encounter, should they realize you're exceptional?
So you know, as I am a product of my environment. We're all products of our environment. And in the case you heard me talk about the fact that my early years were in a British colony with extraordinarily high standards from a family system that had very high standards. And even when I came to this country and I was cleaning bathrooms, I knew that the expectation for my life from my parents and my family was going to be around exceptionality. It was not going to be, and that cleaning the bathroom was part of the journey. It was not the stop, right? So I do think that and I don't think of it as a burden. One of the things that hopefully people have started to understand about me is I have an intentionality about language, because language does create reality and it creates constructs from which we operate. So if I think about exceptionality or being an exception or being exceptional as a burden or a challenge, it's like something I've got to fight. It's like something I've got to be ready and I've got to be armed, as opposed to it's an opportunity. So all of a sudden I am now opening up and I'm thinking, wow, it's an opportunity. So I'm thinking innovation. I'm thinking, wow, you know, that's really interesting. What does being exceptional mean? What are all the different ways in which I could show up as being exceptional, as opposed to, oh my gosh, this is a burden. So language does matter. I think of being exceptional. And again, I want to really encourage the participants to be unapologetically confident, not arrogant, right? Be unapologetically confident about who you are and what you have to bring to the table. And it takes time. It is a journey. So you don't magically become that, but I'm really going to urge you to think about yourself from that place and really have a vision for yourself and for your life that really is about being exceptional, right? And exceptional will show up in many different ways. It's not just quote unquote acing the test, right? That's one measure. You could use that as a measure of exceptionality. For me, being exceptional is about the life that I'm leading, right? At the end of my days, will I be able to say that I use the gift of life in the most meaningful way that I could? That's, to me, is what exceptional is about, right? And hopefully that's what people see. And you know, the counsel I would give them, I'm going to read something because I sent it to my daughter yesterday, because she's 19 years old, and like, you know, 19-year-olds, she is on her journey. And I sent this to her yesterday because she at times, like so many of us, me included. It's a quote from Michelle Maros, and it says, "It is totally and completely okay for people not to like you or understand you. What matters is how you love, honor, and accept yourself. Your life is a masterpiece. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else." And that's when you get yourself rooted in things like that. That's what starts to define being exceptional.
Mm, mm. So, number of questions, Kay. This is wonderful and very inspiring. So, one set of questions has to do with, you're so accomplished, you overcame so many obstacles. Did you ever want to throw in the towel in at
Yeah.
some time and say, you know what, this is not for me, I'm going to give up? And then there's another lovely question from
Mm.
Cher, who says, you had, of course, the benefit of extraordinary parents and a mother and father and all of that. He says, what happens, what's your advice to people who have a broken childhood? How do you
Yeah.
overcome that trauma?
Yeah. So I'll answer the first one. Of course, I am human, so there are days when I literally would like nothing more than to pull the covers over my head and, go live on an island somewhere and, just sit by the beach and put my feet in the water. And then reality happens. So I back to knowing about myself. I am wired in a particular way, but I will tell you that one of the most challenging moments that I had was more around the physical limitations of my body. So Huggy and Bob know that I've had a couple of really challenging circumstances. A couple of years ago, I climbed Kilimanjaro, and it was just extraordinary. And just before I started the summit, I was having knee pain, and I convinced the surgeon to give me a shot of cortisone in the knee so that I could make it up the mountain and make it back down. And when I came back down, I went right in and had the surgery. And that started a series of, I can describe a series of traumas. I had both of my knees operated on. I then ended up breaking my foot. And shortly after that, I ended up with spine surgery. And those were, I would say, the most challenging parts of my life, because so much of my ability to function, I had, I was a power lifter. So much, the physicality was a way of expressing power for me. And I've had to learn to overcome that. There were absolutely days, and my back went out. I was in Ecuador, in the jungle, embedded with indigenous tribes, and being airlifted out was challenging. So it's in those moments when it just felt like it would have been easier to just given up, but it was definitely more physical. And what was interesting is, what helped me to overcome those moments was, believe it or not, surrender. And what I mean by that is, I literally had to surrender to what was happening to my body. This was the one time I could not power through. I couldn't walk, right? For quite some time, I couldn't walk. For quite some time, I had a hole in my back. And in that moment, what was interesting was surrendering was the most powerful thing. Giving up was the most powerful thing that I could do, as opposed to trying to push through. So that's, I hope that answered your question, but that is just me at my most vulnerable. Really, really challenging. Your second question about when you don't have the blessing of parents who are either intact or with you. I say that mother is a verb, not a noun. And therefore, when you think about even parent, to parent, not parent, because I think that's what I have learned is, if you think about those things as a noun, if you think about mother as a noun, father as a noun, parent as a noun, it is embodied in the presence of an individual. But if you think about mother, father, parent as a verb, you have the opportunity then to have people who are not necessarily your kin, people who are not, quote unquote, your traditional parent, mother, father, to have the experience of having them mother you, father you, parent you, And interestingly enough, in my life, that's what I do because I know how blessed I am.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I do. I really, really subscribe to this notion that mother is a verb. It's not a noun. And therefore, anyone can be mothered. Father, men can mother others, right?
I love that. I love that insight, Kay, that mother is a verb and not a noun.
Mhm.
I'm going to share that with my mother when I talk to her. She's 92, and I'm going to blame you for this insight. What she says to me. There are a number of others who are enchanted by the books that you read.
Mm.
And in particular, they're all touched by the advice you gave your daughter. So the question they're asking is, are there other books that you read and you would recommend to them?
Wow. Um, so I am a voracious reader because I'm so curious and I read everything, and I mean everything. So I will tell the participants, if you want to send me book recommendations, I am always looking to read, and I'm generally reading both hard copy books as well as audiobooks, because I used to be a runner. I can only walk now because of my multiple surgeries, but I listen to books and I read the full spectrum. One of my favorite books is by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I love books that are, I call them messy family dramas. So The Vanishing Half that came out this year, I love that book. There is a book called Educated by Tarnower. I cannot remember what her first name is, but it is a true story of a woman, and I see a lot of my story in her, of a young woman who grew up in a very rural part of the country, and her family lived off the grid. They had a certain set of beliefs that caused them to really, in many ways, reject traditional systems like education and all those things. So most of her brothers and sisters were not educated, and she did not go to school, but had this urge within herself and desire within herself that propelled her from that all the way to Harvard University. Just an extraordinary story. So I don't hesitate at all. I mean, I read everything from White Fragility, Caste, you name it, I read it. Someone put it in the chat, but please tell the participants that, and oh, by the way, I also read the Bible. So this year, I decided that what I was going to do was I was going to read the Bible from the very beginning to the end. And I mean, I've grown up in the church like so many people, but the stories in the Bible are fascinating. And I am looking at them through the lens of leadership. Huggy, you will appreciate this. Hopefully so will the audience. And where I have been spending a fair bit of time and drawing analogies to where we are now in our own political challenge. And maybe this is, people might not find it relevant, but I think of the journey of the Israelites to the promised land, escaping slavery under the Egyptians. And the fact that even with this bold promise, so many of them stayed behind. And as they were moving through the 40 years through the wilderness, they were disobedient, ungrateful, begged for manna. When they got manna, then they wanted meat. Then it was about water. And this really, it is such an interesting story and has so many lessons about leadership, because then the kings emerge from those stories. And even as they went to the promised land, so many of them wanted to return to slavery under the Egyptians because it represented security and what they knew. Right. So for me, it's a fascinating to look at it that way, as opposed to these are just Bible stories. These are real leadership lessons. And all the kings, and kind of, it speaks to in some ways, the fragility of leadership as well. So anyway, I could go on because I love, love, love
It's
reading.
amazing how much you read. There are so many great questions, and I feel guilty because I would love to ask you all these questions, and we just don't have the time. But I'm going to close with one last question by Mari Choi. And
Mhm,
she really tees up a very important issue. And she says,
mhm.
as an ambitious woman, how do I manage work and family?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say I am so proud of you for claiming ambition, because so many women really are hesitant to claim that they are ambitious. And what I say to people, there is no value. It's not good or bad. Ambition is an aspiration, right? It's an expression. Blind ambition is different. But I am just so proud of you for claiming the fact that you are an ambitious woman. One of the things that I learned is we often try to, we talk about balance. And when you talk about balance, it implies that you somehow reach this stasis, this magical place. And over my 61 years, over my 40 plus years of work, it is clear that there are going to be times when work is going to take precedence, and you've got to then figure out, how do you negotiate? And I talk about contract early and often,
Hmm.
right? Because the dynamism of the relationship, it changes over time. And as some person, I say to people, the casualty of my extraordinary success and inattention is a divorce. But I will tell you that that is because I was striving for this balance, working really hard at work, feeling completely guilty all of the time. And over time, I just said, work is the path. And that's a lesson. It's not a regret. I have two amazing children. So I have no regrets about that. I have lots of lessons about that. And the major lesson is, do not force women into this binary notion, and men into this binary notion of balance. Really help people understand that there are going to be points in time where you are, maybe it's earlier in your career, and you therefore are really putting more effort and focus on your work life. You are still working on your family, your home, etc. But if you are in partnership or in relationship with someone, talk about that. Really, really talk about that. This is where you build community together. And that is, as I said, it's not a regret. It's an observation and learning that I have, that I still hold out hope that my next partnership, not marriage or husband, my next partnership, I can bring some of those lessons to bear. But unapologetically ambitious.
Beautiful, beautiful. How are we doing for time, Saba?
Yeah, we're doing great. We have exactly 5 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
5 minutes left. In the meantime, Kay, the participants have been suggesting a number of wonderful books.
Oh, good.
Joy by Dalai Lama, Glass.
Oh, I love that book. Oh, I met the Dalai Lama.
Yeah,
That was truly the high point of I did meet the Dalai Lama. It was the high point of my life. I did.
He does have
Beautiful
such a,
presence.
yeah, he does, doesn't he?
He does.
He
He
does have a
does. Oh, these
luminous.
are beautiful. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah,
Wow.
we'll actually put together these
The list.
suggestions, and
Perfect.
we'll
Thank
make
you.
them available to
Thank
everybody,
you.
because
Thank you very much.
as we know, our gifts. So
Yeah. And of course, scaling excellence. How could they not have that on the list?
so, we have 5 minutes. Um, you're a person who loves and admires language.
Mm.
So I'm curious, if there was a gift you were going to leave our participants with just 2 words to master for the next couple of months as they're thinking about which version of my life I want to choose,
Mm.
what would those
Mm.
2 words be?
Mm. Mm. And I always say context is decisive.
Mhm.
So this is, the context that we're in now, pandemic. We are in an era right now of extraordinary divisiveness, right? polarization, let me call that, where we are operating really in a binary society. You either like me or you don't. You either with me or you're not. So there's a lot of binary, there's a binary stance that's happening. We're in the midst of a pandemic. In some arenas, kind of where I quote unquote hang out, like down in the Tenderloin, really significant pain and suffering of the humankind. So if I could leave people with anything at all, I would leave them with, yes, humility, because I think humility allows you to see the other person. So humility and sight. And what I mean by sight is, and this happens all the time, we don't take the time to really see people. And I learned that from working with our unhoused population. And for the benefit of the people here, I don't say homeless, I say unhoused. And what I learned from them is so often they don't feel seen because people step around them, people turn their head. Even if somebody's offering them a cup of coffee, they are not looking at them. So I'm going to urge people, humility and sight.
Beautiful.
Humility, how you show up. Sight is just see people. Just see people.
I love that. I really love that. Angelia Trans says, as a woman, yes, in capital letters. Being unapologetically ambitious is a beautiful trait.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
But as all of us leave, please remember what Kaye Foster has actually shared with you today through her, not just her biography, but her character and her kindness. Here's what I'm taking away. Hopefully you are as well. The first thing I'm actually taking away is being a leader means being in the help business. You have to help other people, otherwise there's no way you can be a leader, is what I heard. And the other thing is, the two other things that I take away is, one is, I was so struck by Kaye saying it's not either or. And the way I interpreted it is, don't succumb to a zero-sum bias. Because once you have a zero-sum bias, you think it's a fixed pie you're allocating, and you then run into all kinds of problems. By the way, there is research that suggests that the fixed pie way of thinking is not just a psychological bias, but actually a Western cultural trait.
Yes.
Other countries, other cultures, you don't necessarily have that. That's something to sort of think about. And the third thing, I'm so struck about sight. See people. And the way I'm interpreting that is, it's not only seeing other people, but the way you see yourself.
Yes.
And I think what I'm taking away from Kaye is, see others as persons. Don't deperson them as categories.
Yes.
Homeless,
Yes.
this or that,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
So
Yes.
don't put them into categories, person them. And if you person them, you will person yourself too. Because when you deperson them, you are unpersoning yourself. And as always, in an afternoon with, or in an evening with Kaye, I go back with so many new understandings. And this is why we enjoy doing this. I just want all of you to join me in giving an electronic applause, as it were, for the amazing Kaye Foster. So.